What's up everyone, Lance Hedrick here, and today I've got 3 Aeropress tips for you. Aeropress is arguably one of the most beloved brewing devices on the market. It made its debut around 20 years ago and has still captivated the palates of people around the world. There have been scads of recipes posted online that have been competed with in different championships, and so it can be a bit overwhelming for you at home to kind of figure out what works best for you. Today, I'm going to give you 3 tips that will help you dial in your coffee to your taste preferences. Now, these tips might be against some of the commonly understood ways of approaching the Aeropress, so I ask that you have an open mind as we go through this to see if they make tastier cups for you, because that is what we're here for, tasty cups. I'm not going to be doing my recipes on here because it is slightly different. We're focusing on the OG. One of the claims to fame of the Aeropress is you can make an espresso-like beverage with it. Because of this, a lot of people have turned to pushing really hard in a way that emulates, I guess, a pump or a lever on an espresso machine. The harder you press on your Aeropress, the more colloids and undissolved compounds are going to get into your final cup. So my first tip is actually to push much more slowly. I know that some of you might be like, that's going to take even longer, but the difference is massive. I pushed through in 6 seconds or so, a really quick, powerful push just to show the 2 different sides of the equation. This one I spent about a minute just slowly pressing through it. The ideal filtration unit in an Aeropress in any extraction is the coffee bed itself. When you push really hard, you are forcing a lot of things that otherwise wouldn't make it through to make it through. Then what we're going to do is pour the resulting liquid through V60 paper filters. And what you're going to see will kind of demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. So again, this one was the hard press. This is the one where we pushed really hard in order to maybe get a thicker body, which we definitely were able to achieve because we saw that cloudy brew. But it's also going to have more astringency, more bitterness, and a less enjoyable texture in general because we're going to have a much more rough experience due to all of those things that have made it through the filtration units. I ain't got time for that. Look at that choke. It's just dripping at a very slow rate because the majority of that has been fully clogged. Lots of things have been caught in that filter. Lots of fines, lots of particles in general, and likely a lot of colloids that have been stuck inside the filter that would not be ideal on the palate. Now we will do the slow pressed one. So let's start the timer, and we'll have a little spillage, but it's okay. All right. There we go. 35 seconds and we have the filter is completely gone. There's a little bit at the very tip, but that's just going to be difficult to get out without any contact points. Maybe if we put it all on the side, it'll go. Slow press. Similar to a V60 in the sense that the flavors are really clean, really clear, but it's really juicy. It has a much nicer mouthfeel than what you could ever get on something like a V60 or an Gagne or an Ori or something like that. This one obviously has a much thicker body, but it's rougher on the tongue. It's kind of like, it has drying aspects about it. It has a little astringency on the finish. Still a decent cup, don't get me wrong, but definitely this is my preference. It's much more sparkling, much more clear, much more clean in general. Granted, this one had, a bit more contact time because we were pressing so slowly. The bit that was left was having more exposure to the slurry. But in reality, these are similar extraction yields, and you just have one that tastes a lot better than the other. The next tip for better Aeropresses is actually something I didn't do in the first one because I didn't want to ruin the surprise, but it's actually to bloom your coffee. Blooming doesn't matter nearly as much when you're doing the inverted method, but that's a less and less common practice nowadays because of the potential injury whenever you're doing that. But when you do the typical Aeropress, having a bloom and having no bloom have a big, big difference. You will notice if you pour it all in at once, you have a lot of liquid that drips through into that final cup. Now that liquid is going to be severely under-extracted, very tea-like, not much coffee in it at all. And that's because in order for extraction to really occur, those grounds need to be saturated quite well. Okay, we're up to the 4. Now I would put the plunger on and we move it over. All right, so we have 20.5 grams. So let's get a little swirl on there. Take a sample. The grounds need to be saturated in order for diffusion to begin to occur because they need to be degassed. The water needs to actually get all the way into the grounds before you're able to really start to extract the yummies. If you want to get to Taste Town, it takes a little time. This time I'm going to bloom it for about 45 seconds and pour it up just shy of number 4 to take into account what may have dropped into the cup. When you do a bloom, you have some minimal amount of water that goes through, but because the bed absorbs roughly twice its weight in water, you're able to actually use a lot of that water to get that saturation point up and allow the diffusion to occur when you pour the rest of your water in. So as you can see, there are still droplets because the grounds aren't so efficient to be able to suck up all that water immediately, so some does make it through. But then after about 45 seconds, we'll pour the rest of the water in and we'll stop it at that 20.5 gram or as close as we can get. All right, so we stopped it at 21. It's quite close. Not ideal because when measuring concentrations, you want it to be identical, but I think this is good enough for our purposes. This one was at 3.56, whereas the previous one was at 2.10. That is a huge increase in the amount that was able to get into that final cup, meaning we're not diluting the beverage as much, we're getting more of that extraction early on. So you're not having to waste a lot of water diluting your brew. You can have a more efficient extraction with that blooming phase. You may still prefer a weaker extraction, which is absolutely fine. I'm not someone that advocates for 26% extraction, but just know that you can use less water for a more flavorful brew if you're using the bloom. Now, the final tip is probably the most counterintuitive, and it's because it's been drilled in your head for so long that it's going to be hard to shake off. It deals with grind size. Oh, on our grinder, this range is for espresso, this range is for mocha pot. On the other end, this is French press, this is Chemex. A lot of times you see people adding Aeropress range, which is on the very fine side of things. Alan Adler, the inventor of the Aeropress, didn't even grind that finely. He went a lot cooler and a bit coarser. But over time, people started to go really fine because they were trying to emulate espresso with the Aeropress. I'm not saying that finely ground Aeropresses don't taste good, but what I am saying is a lot of you get stuck in this mindset that it must be really fine for it to be an Aeropress. That's simply not the case. The coarser you go, the more even the flow through that coffee bed. So with every brew method, I always recommend people to start as coarse as you can really go, and then you go finer and finer until you land on the sweet spot. The more fine you go, the more potential astringency. The finer you go, the flow through the puck might be more and more uneven. It's not bad to let that sit a little bit longer. In fact, Jonathan Gagne, a friend of mine, has a 10-minute Aeropress recipe that a lot of people really like. Think about coffee cuppings. People don't even start sipping those till the 10-minute marker anyway. As an immersion brew sits for a long time, especially because there's no real percolation going on, it's not going to affect the extraction that much beyond minute marker 3. Because what is capable of being extracted wants to come out pretty quickly, especially depending on your grind size and your water temperature. A little bonus one is I also recommend not going super hot. And I recently posted a video right here of a weird Aeropress recipe where you're using 78 to 80 degree water. And it tastes really great. I never really go over 95 degrees, even with the lightest of light roasts on an Aeropress, and there are a lot of times it's only around 90 or 91 degrees, if not even cooler than that. And what I find is a direct correlation between that and the perceived bitterness. I will put Jonathan Gagne's blog post below about what is causing astringency based off conversations between himself and Samo Smirke. Everything that I kind of try and do is to reduce bitterness, reduce harshness, reduce that acrid perception, and reduce astringency. I wonder how it tastes now. I like to do 15 grams of coffee. I like to do 250 grams of water, just like on my V60. I might up that amount of coffee to 16 grams for maybe medium roasted coffees, and up to 17 grams if you like darker roasted coffees. You can go coarser, obviously, and I do on occasion, especially if it's maybe a really old coffee or a really processed coffee. This is a washed coffee, so I go a little finer than my usual. I do around 92 degrees Celsius. If you're at medium, maybe go to 88. If you're at dark, maybe go to like 82 to 84 and just play around with that. First things first, I always like to level the bed in here. If you just dump it in and start pouring, you can have a much shallower part on one side of the bed, which can allow water to immediately get into that cup. We want to make sure as much water as possible is retained in that bed during our bloom. In fact, if you have a mellow drip or something, that can allow you to just barely wet the bed on the top and it'll go through the bed more slowly. That can be a really good thing. You can kind of swirl it to help even out the wetness of the bed, but I'm going to pour nice and slow, let the water stream kind of break up before it hits the bed so it doesn't penetrate as deep. That way I can control kind of how much water is getting through into the mug during that bloom. I like to give it a swirl just to make sure everything is nicely wetted. As you see, we had some drops coming through once I swirled it, but it pretty much stayed in there before the swirl occurred. Now, as you notice, I'm not getting the kettle back up to temp. I'm not very worried about temperature with Aeropress. Once we do that push through, it actually aids in some of that like emulsifying, and it forces through a lot of that liquid retain ratio that could be in the grounds. We're getting a pretty solid extraction with this brew method. So at 45 seconds, I'm going to pour up to 250. I do kind of a little circle just to make sure all the grounds are integrated. And I just kind of pour in the center. Nothing super fancy on the pour itself. Getting it up to 250 relatively quickly. There we are. And then I just set the plunger right at the top to kind of stop the drops coming through. Move it to the side because you don't want to press onto a scale. And I give it a little swirl, just like so. Now I'm going to wait till the 2-minute mark. So we had 45-second bloom, then with all the water in, we let it sit about 1:15. You can, of course, go longer than this if you don't feel like it had adequate extraction. It won't extract a ton more after 2 minutes, but it will continue to extract, certainly. So overall, it'll be about a 3-minute process from the first drop to the final go. So as you see, I'm barely pushing at all. It's almost just the weight of my hand, just barely pushing, which allows for a more clean and even flow through the coffee. I do not press through the hiss. The more you press at the end, the more of the potential astringent particles can get into your cup. Pull this up a bit so it stops it. And we have our cup of coffee. It's absolutely fantastic. Do not sit there and try to push all of your weight into the Aeropress. Go nice and slow. Try that out. I like it. You may not, and that's completely okay. Try giving your Aeropress a bloom. Go to the normal way of brewing it where you have the Aeropress right in the decanter, bloom it for a bit if you're not already doing that, and then pour to your target weight. I then like to immediately put the plunger in so that no more is dripping out, as I like to have that kind of immersion, percolation kind of blend, and then slowly press through. Don't go so fine. Try out some coarser grounds. It's not going to give you as much resistance, but you're not pushing hard anyway, because we're trying to maintain the integrity of the bed. We're trying to lessen the amount of those particles that can get through to the final cup, which can obfuscate your palate and make just a much tastier brew all around. Give these 3 tips a try. Let me know below if it works for you. If you want to try out the recipe, have at it. Just remember, there are variables that you can control in order to optimize it for your specific coffee. If you enjoy what you see, please, hit the like, hit the subscribe, check out my Patreon down below. All of it is super helpful to the channel and to the work that I do here. Regardless, I'm going to enjoy this, something tasty, and I hope that you brew something tasty today. And cheers. This one's nice. I didn't hold it long enough. That's what you're looking at, isn't it?
Yes.
Damn it.